8:43 p.m., December 19, 1944, Sergeant William Mackenzie of the 395th U.S. Infantry Regiment slowly raised his hands. Through the thick, swirling snow of the Ardennes forest, he stared at the German soldier standing before him. A lone man, one pistol. Behind Mackenzie, 92 more American soldiers stood, fully armed with M1 Garand rifles, Thompson submachine guns and grenades. They had ammunition. They had the numbers. They had every tactical advantage imaginable. But in that moment, in that quiet forest clearing, the German soldier possessed something far more potent than firepower. He had absolute, unwavering resolve. And over the next 47 minutes, Private First Class Friedrich Weber would accomplish the militarily impossible, capturing 93 armed enemies with only 8 rounds in his Walter P-38. The Battle of the Bulge had begun on December 16th. Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, codename Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last. Desperate offensive in the west, 200,000 German soldiers, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, 1,700 artillery pieces, launched against surprised American positions. The objective, a breakthrough to the Meuse River, the capture of Antwerp, the severing of the Allied armies, an impossible goal with insufficient resources. But Hitler insisted. 3 days later, the American lines had been breached, units scattered, soldiers disoriented and lost in the dense woods. The offensive would ultimately fail, costing Germany its last reserves, accelerating the end of the war. But in this moment, on December 19th, anything seemed possible. German tanks rolled forward, American troops retreated in disarray, and in a forest south of Elsenborn, one of the strangest encounters of the entire war would unfold. The 395th Regiment had received orders to retreat to the assembly point near Elsenborn, but Mackenzie's platoon had become lost. 93 men, exhausted, cold, nervous. They didn't know these woods. The Germans did. Friedrich Weber, 27 years old, a mountain trooper from the 3rd Paratrooper Division, had grown up in the Bavarian Alps. Born in Garmisch-Partenkirchen on March 12, 1917, he had spent his childhood in the mountains. His father, Johannes Weber, had been a mountain guide before an avalanche took his life in 1935. Weber had learned to read the mountains, to understand the signs of the weather, to navigate terrain where other men would get lost. These skills, honed in the peaceful Bavarian Alps, had proven deadly valuable in war. He understood forests, he understood snow, and he understood something even more important. He understood fear because he had known it. Every day since 1940 had learned to control it, to harness it, to hide it behind the mask of the perfect soldier. Weber had been at war since 1940. France, where as a young private first class, he learned the blitzkrieg tactics that sent German tanks racing through the Ardennes. Crete in May 1941, where he jumped from 400 feet into hell and 43% of his comrades never reached the ground. The Eastern Front, 1942-1943, where he fought in -40-degree weather, where men died of frostbite before they even saw a bullet. Italy, 1943-1944, Monte Cassino, where the very earth seemed to burn. He had seen things that would have broken other men. He had watched friends die. Staff Sergeant Hans Müller, his comrade since France, ripped apart by Soviet artillery near Kursk. Lieutenant Paul Richter, who stood next to him at Monte Cassino, speaking 1 second about his fiancée in Berlin, and the next second simply gone. At Monte Cassino, he had endured 73 hours in a bombed-out building, surrounded by the dead, surviving on snow and a pure refusal to die. His comrades called him the Shadow because he moved through enemy lines like a ghost. But on this day, in December 1944, Weber was separated from his unit, alone, on reconnaissance, with only his Walter P-38 pistol and 8 9mm parabellum rounds. The Walter P-38, introduced in 1938, was reliable, accurate to 50 meters, with an 8-round magazine. But against nearly 100 armed men, the weapon was practically meaningless. Most men would have hidden, waited, avoided. Weber moved forward. In his breast pocket, he carried the last letter from his mother, dated December 3rd, having reached him just a week before. She wrote about Greta, now 17, working in an ammunition factory in Munich. She wrote about the hunger, the bombings, the fear. She wrote, "Come home alive, Friedrich, that is all I want." Weber had read the letter 100 times, the ink smudged by his dirty fingers. He thought of that letter as he moved forward. Toward the American voices, "Come home alive." He heard them before he saw them, American English, nervous voices, the clatter of equipment. Weber crawled onto a rocky outcrop, peering through the pines. His heart sank. Almost 100 men, fully armed, and he had 8 bullets. The mathematical reality was brutally simple. He could kill 8 men. Then the other 85 would tear him to pieces. Any rational man would have retreated. But Friedrich Weber had learned at Monte Cassino, war is not rational. War is psychological. The Americans were lost. He saw it immediately. They moved without order, without discipline. Mackenzie, the sergeant, was trying to organize them, but Weber could see the panic. These men had heard about the German offensive. They had heard stories of Malmedy, of captured GIs being shot. Whether true or propaganda, it didn't matter. Fear doesn't need facts. Fear feeds on uncertainty, and Weber would use that fear like a weapon. He waited until they took a short break. Soldiers in a semicircle, some smoking, others rubbing their feet. Mackenzie was studying a map. The perfect moment. Weber stood up, stepped out of the woods, pistol in hand, and spoke the only 2 words he needed. Hands up. The effect was electric. 93 heads turned. 93 men froze. In their eyes, Weber saw not resistance. He saw shock. He saw confusion. He saw the burning question. Where are the others? No man moves alone so confidently. No single soldier steps out of the woods with only a pistol and demands the surrender of nearly 100 armed men. Unless he's the vanguard. Unless dozens more are lurking behind him. Weber let that question hang in the air. He made no mistake. He didn't nervously glance over his shoulder. He showed no uncertainty. Instead, in broken English, he said, "My comrades surround you. 20 men, machine guns. Panzerfäuste, you have 1 minute. Weapons down or we open fire." The lie was bold. The lie was dangerous. The lie was brilliant. Because Weber understood the fundamental principle of military psychology. People believe what they fear. Mackenzie glanced toward the woods. Every shadow between the trees became a possible MG-42 nest. Every twig that snapped became a German soldier. The silence of the forest, which had been comforting before, became menacing. One of the American soldiers, Private Danny Cooper from Iowa, whispered to his friend, "I see movement over there." He saw nothing. His brain filled the blanks with his worst fears. Another man, Corporal James Harrison, swore later he'd heard German voices. He hadn't. But in that moment of maximum tension, every sound, every shadow, became confirmation of their fear. Mackenzie was no coward. William Patrick Mackenzie, 29 years old, from Boston, Massachusetts. He had fought on Omaha Beach on D-Day, had seen the sea turn red with American blood. He had fought through the hedgerows of Normandy, paying for every meter with blood. He carried photos in his pocket. His wife Sarah, 7 months pregnant when he had left. The baby would now be almost 6 months old. A girl, the letters had told him, Melissa Ann Mackenzie. A girl he had never seen, whose face he only knew in photographs. He had fought in Normandy, had seen German steel, but he was also responsible for 92 lives, 92 men who wanted to go home, who had families, dreams, futures. And the math seemed simple. If there really were 20 Germans with MG42s in the trees, his men would be massacred before they got 10 yards. The M1 Garand rifles were accurate to 500 yards. The MG42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute. They wouldn't stand a chance. Weber saw the doubt in Mackenzie's eyes. He pressed on. 30 seconds. He raised his Walther P-38, aiming not at Mackenzie, but at the man next to him. Private First Class Michael Torres. A young face. Fear in his eyes. Weber didn't intend to shoot, but Torres didn't know that. Torres only saw the barrel of a Walther P-38 pointed at his chest, and the cold, dead nothingness in the German soldier's eyes. "We surrender," Mackenzie said. The words hung in the ice-cold air like a sentence. Some of the men looked at their sergeant in disbelief. A few made moves to raise their weapons. But Mackenzie repeated louder, "That's an order. Weapons down. Hands up. We surrender." One after another, the American soldiers dropped their rifles. The sound of metal on snow again and again, 93 times. Each time, Weber felt his heart pounding in his chest. Every moment could be the moment someone realized the truth. A single skeptical soldier who actually looked into the woods and saw nothing. A single brave man who decided to shoot. But that moment didn't come. The psychology held. Weber ordered them to line up. He had Mackenzie translate the orders into German and pass them on, which the sergeant did with a broken voice. Weber positioned himself so that the forest was always behind him, always that menacing source of invisible German soldiers. He had the Americans pile their equipment into a heap, 93 rifles, Thompson submachine guns, hand grenades, ammunition belts, an arsenal that could equip a small army, guarded by one man with 8 bullets. "March," Weber ordered, pointing to a path that led deeper into the forest, deeper into German territory. The Americans obeyed. They marched in a long column, hands on their heads, convinced that German soldiers in the trees were watching them. Convinced that every misstep would be their last. Weber walked behind them, Walther P-38 drawn, never letting his mask fall. In his head, he prayed to every god who would listen. 47 minutes. They only had to march for 47 minutes until they reached the German lines. The prisoners didn't speak. The crunch of boots in the snow was the only sound. The snow was falling heavier now, large flakes sticking to their uniforms. The temperature had dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The men could see their breath, white clouds hanging in the icy air. The forest was silent, too silent. No birds, no animals, just the sound of 93 men marching through the snow and the distant thunder of artillery, always present, always reminding them that the war was never really gone. Weber could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they sometimes glanced quickly at the woods, always searching for the ghosts they believed to be there. Corporal Michael Stevens from Michigan turned briefly once, trying to read Weber's face. Weber stared back with the empty coldness he had perfected. Stevens quickly looked away. He would later write in his war diary, "The eyes of that man showed nothing, no warmth, no humanity, only duty. I believed he would shoot any of us without hesitation." Stevens was wrong. Weber was no monster. In his breast pocket, he carried a letter from his mother. A photo of his little sister Greta, but he had learned to hide that humanity, to bury it beneath the mask of the perfect soldier, because in war, humanity was a weakness, and Friedrich Weber couldn't afford any weakness. The minutes stretched like hours. Weber counted his steps, calculated the distance, 2 miles to the German lines. At this pace, 35 minutes. He only had to maintain the illusion for 35 more minutes. But then, After 23 minutes of marching, the inevitable happened. Private Danny Cooper, the man from Iowa, tripped, falling in the snow. Automatically, his friend turned to help. The movement was sudden, unexpected. Weber reacted instinctively, raising his Walther P-38, shouting, "Halt!" His finger was on the trigger. The entire column froze. And in that moment, Private James Patterson saw something. He saw that Weber's hand was shaking, only minimally. Only for a second, but it was shaking. Now Patterson, 19 years old, had sharp eyes, and suddenly his brain started to work. One man, one Walther P-38, no radio communication, no signals to supposed comrades. The whole time, this German had only looked in one direction, forward. He had never given orders to the left or right. He had never communicated with the men who were supposedly in the woods. Patterson opened his mouth. If he spoke now, if he said, "He's alone," everything would crumble. 93 men would soon realize they were being held captive by a single soldier with only 8 bullets. They would overpower him. Weber might kill 3, 4, maybe 5 men. Then they would tear him apart. Weber saw Patterson's eyes. He saw the realization there, and in that split second, Private First Class Friedrich Weber made the bravest decision of his life. He lowered his pistol. He looked Patterson straight in the eye, and he nodded, a tiny nod, an acknowledgement, a silent communication that said, "Yes, you're right. But you won't say anything." Why? Because in Patterson's eyes, Weber didn't just see realization. He saw exhaustion, fear, the desire to survive. Patterson was just a kid, barely old enough to shave, thousands of miles from home, fighting in a war he didn't understand. And Weber gave him a choice: fight and maybe die, or remain silent and almost certainly live. Patterson closed his mouth. He looked away. The column started moving again. Cooper struggled to his feet, supported by his buddy. Weber exhaled for the first time in 2 minutes. But he knew. Time was now the enemy. Every further step was a chance for someone else to realize the truth. He quickened the pace. "Faster," he commanded. The Americans obeyed, their steps hastier. Some began to breathe heavily in the thin winter air. Weber ignored their complaints. 1.7 kilometers to go. 19 minutes at this pace. He could do it. He had to do it. Then they heard the gunfire. Distant but distinct. A battle. Somewhere west of their position. The Battle of the Bulge raged on. Some of the Americans flinched at each shot. Others looked hopefully in that direction, as if their comrades might rescue them. Weber used their distraction, driving them forward, always forward. Finally, after 44 minutes of total tension, Weber saw the impossible. German positions, a hastily erected checkpoint, 2 Tiger tanks, German paratroopers behind sandbags. Weber could have wept with relief. Instead, he shouted in German, "Don't shoot! I have prisoners!" The German soldiers at the checkpoint stared in disbelief. Captain Klaus Steiner, the commanding officer, stepped forward, his eyes widening as he grasped the scene. 93 American soldiers, hands on their heads, led by a single private first class with a pistol. Steiner, a veteran of the Eastern Front, had seen many impossible things, but this surpassed them all. "Weber," Steiner said slowly, "how many men were with you?" "Only me, sir," Weber replied, his voice finally showing the exhaustion he felt. Steiner glanced at the prisoners, then back at Weber. "You captured 93 armed men, alone, with a pistol?" "Yes, sir." "How many bullets did you fire?" Weber opened the magazine of his Walther P-38. 8 rounds, all still inside. "None, sir." The silence that followed was absolute. The German soldiers looked at Weber as if he had turned water into wine. the American prisoners, now understanding the truth, stood in various states of shock and disbelief. Sergeant Mackenzie actually let out a short, incredulous laugh. A sound half humor, half hysteria. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, every German soldier in the sector knew about Private First Class Weber and his 93 prisoners. Major General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, ordered Weber to report to him personally. Weber stood in a drafty command tent, dirty, exhausted, still not quite believing what he had done. Von Manteuffel studied him for a long time. "Private First Class Weber," he finally said, "what you did is either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've seen in this war. Possibly both." He paused. "I can't award you the Knight's Cross for capturing prisoners, no matter how extraordinary. But I can give you the Iron Cross First Class, and I can personally ensure that your family in Bavaria hears what a son they have." Weber saluted. "Thank you, sir. But I would like something else." Oh, von Manteuffel raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The American prisoners, sir. I want to make sure they are treated fairly, according to the Geneva Convention." Von Manteuffel smiled. The first time in days. "That is already guaranteed, Private First Class. We are soldiers, not barbarians." He looked out of the tent entrance at the prisoner collection point, where the Americans were receiving warm soup. "Besides, after what you put them through, I think they've suffered enough." It was a joke, but it carried truth. The 93 men Weber had captured would live with that story for the rest of their lives. Sergeant Mackenzie would tell it at family gatherings, each time with more details, each time with more respect for the German soldier who had outmaneuvered him. Private James Patterson, the man who had seen the truth but remained silent, would take his secret to his grave in 1998. Only in his posthumous letters, found by his granddaughter Rebecca in 1999, would his family learn the full story. Rebecca, a history professor at Ohio State University, published the letters in an article for the Journal of Military History in 2001. The revelation shocked military historians. Here at last was the answer to a question they had had for decades. How had Weber done it? The answer was terrifyingly simple. He had an ally among the prisoners. Not one who helped him, but one who remained silent when he could have spoken. Patterson wrote, "I still see his face, every night for 54 years. Not the face of Weber, although I see that too. No, I see the faces of Danny Cooper, of Mackenzie, of all the men who didn't know how close we were to death. I had the power to save them all, or kill them all. I chose silence. Until my last breath, I will not know if I chose correctly." Corporal Michael Stevens returned to Michigan and became a high school teacher. He used the story of Weber to teach his students about military psychology. For 37 years, from 1947 to 1984, he taught history at Dearborn High School. Thousands of students heard this story. War, he told his classes, is not only won with weapons, it is won in the minds of the men who carry the weapons. And on one day in December 1944, a German soldier completely owned our minds. Many of his former students became officers in the US military. They carried this lesson with them. The Weber tactic, as it came to be known, became part of the psychological warfare curriculum at West Point and Fort Benning. Not as a method to be emulated, but as a warning. Never underestimate what a determined opponent can achieve with psychological manipulation. But what happened to Friedrich Weber? After the Battle of the Bulge, he fought on. He survived the desperate defense, the retreat, the chaos of the final months of the war. On May 7, 1945, one day before the German surrender, Weber surrendered to American troops near Berchtesgaden. The American captain who accepted his surrender was a man named Robert Torres, older brother of Private Michael Torres, one of the 93 men Weber had captured. Torres Jr. had told his brother the story. When Captain Torres saw the name Private First Class Friedrich Weber on the surrender papers, he paused. "Are you the Weber?" he asked in broken German. 93 men, a pistol, Ardennes. Weber nodded wearily. "That was me." Torres stared at him for a long moment. Then, to Weber's absolute surprise, the American captain saluted. "My brother told me the story. He said you treated them fairly, ensured they were well treated as prisoners. He said you were the best soldier he'd ever seen, on either side." Torres lowered his salute. "The war is over, Weber. Go home to your family." Weber returned to Bavaria, to his mother, to Emily, who was now 19. Garmisch-Partenkirchen lay in ruins, but the mountains still stood, eternal and unchanged. Weber found work as a mountain guide, just like his father before him. He led American and British tourists through the Alps, many of them veterans of the war. Some recognized his name, most said nothing. A few, the bravest, asked if he was the Weber. He never confirmed it directly, always changed the subject, focusing on the mountains, the weather, safety. He married in 1952, a woman named Anneliese, a teacher from Munich. They had 2 children, Johann and Maria. He never spoke about the war with them. Not really. Not about the details. Not about the nights he woke up sweating. The faces of the 93 men before his eyes. Only once, when Emily asked if the story was true, the story that had appeared in American newspapers, the Weber incident, as they called it. Weber nodded slowly. "It was the longest day of my life," he said quietly. "I was afraid in every single moment, not afraid of death, afraid that I would make a mistake, that everyone would die, Americans and me. But I did what was necessary, what I thought was right at that moment." "Do you regret it?" Emily asked. Weber thought for a long time. "I regret the war. I regret that young men died, on both sides. But that day? No. On that day, I captured 93 men without firing a single bullet. I sent them home alive. In a war full of death, that was perhaps the most human thing I could do." American military historians study Weber's feat to this day. At the U.S. Army War College in Pennsylvania, there is a psychological warfare course that uses the Weber capture as a case study. Professor Colonel David Richardson, who taught the course from 1987 to 2006, described it this way: "Weber had no superior firepower, no tactical support, no communication. What he had was a perfect understanding of human psychology, and the cold-bloodedness to exploit it. He turned the imaginations of his enemies into his most powerful weapon." That is brilliant, that is terrifying, and that is a lesson that every officer must understand. The lesson is clear: superiority is not just a matter of numbers or firepower. It is a matter of determination, of psychology, of the will of one man projected with such intensity that he distorts reality. Modern special forces, from Navy SEALs to SAS, study this story, not to replicate it because the circumstances were unique, but to understand the human mind is the most critical battlefield. But perhaps the real story isn't Weber's courage. Perhaps the real story is the decision of Private James Patterson, the 19-year-old from Ohio who saw the truth and stayed silent. Patterson lived until 1998, became a pharmacist in Cleveland, married his high school sweetheart, had 3 children. In his posthumous letters he wrote, "I could have spoken. I could have told the truth. We would have fought. Some of us would have died. Maybe me, maybe Danny Cooper, maybe Mackenzie. Instead, I stayed silent, and 93 men went home. Was I a coward? Maybe. But I'm a coward who lived, who had a family, who spent 76 years on this earth. And Weber, the man who captured us, he was right too. Sometimes surviving is braver than fighting. It's a complex truth, uncomfortable. But war is never simple. And the story of Friedrich Weber and the 93 prisoners is a story that forces us to ask difficult questions. What is courage? Is it the willingness to die? Or is it the willingness to live, to make decisions that will haunt you, to carry burdens that no one else can understand? This story is not buried in dusty archives. It lives. It breathes. Every year, descendants of the 93 prisoners meet in Ohio for a reunion. They call it the Weber Gathering. They share stories their grandfathers told, letters they found, diaries they kept, and every year they lay a wreath with 93 white roses and one red one. The red rose is for Friedrich Weber, the man who captured their grandfathers, and in doing so saved their lives. If this story moved you, if you believe that such accounts must be preserved, then support with YouTube's super thanks, the golden heart below. Researching this story meant weeks in American and German military archives, interviews with family members on both sides of the Atlantic, the translation of war diaries and official reports. Every super thanks allows me to dig deeper, to find more stories, to bring more truths to light. History only dies when we stop telling it. Friedrich Weber died in 2003 at his home in Bavaria. He was 86 years old. At his funeral, a surprise appeared, a delegation of 14 Americans. Sons and grandsons of the men he had captured in 1944. They carried American and German flags, and they carried a letter, signed by all the surviving members of the original 93 prisoners who were still alive. The letter was simple. Private First Class Weber, you were our enemy. You took our freedom, but you did not take our lives. In a war where millions died, your decision to use a pistol to threaten, instead of to kill, was an act of mercy. Whether you saw it that way or not, we live because of you. Our children exist because of you. Go in peace, knowing that the world is better because you were in it. Greta Weber, now 76, read the letter at the funeral. When she was finished, the American veterans stood and saluted. Then the German veterans who had come also saluted. And for a brief moment, in a small cemetery in Bavaria, the war truly ended. Not with a treaty, not with a surrender, but with respect. This is the story of Friedrich Weber, one man, one pistol, 93 prisoners, 0 bullets fired, countless lives saved. It's a story about courage, but also about wisdom, about war, but also about humanity, about a moment that could have changed everything, and how one man made the right decision, not despite impossible odds, but because of them. What impresses you the most about this story? Weber's tactical brilliance? Patterson's decision to remain silent? The forgiveness of the American veterans? Share your thoughts below. Many of you have shared incredible family stories from the war, stories of grandfathers who made similarly impossible decisions. Every comment is a piece of living history. Together, we'll ensure that these stories, these lessons, are never forgotten.